Juxus, Kuchihema, Miwuya, Kaniasis, Albert Titman, Dumali Nishinam, Miwok, Maidu, and Pit River. And my mother, actually my grandparents were descendants from what they call Mexico today. So it's definitely an honor to be here. It's always a blessing to get to come over the other side of the mountain to visit our Paiute people, especially here in Bishop. We say on the other side of the mountain, right? It's our relatives, because our people really exist right on the other side of the mountains there. My people, the Ion Band, Miwok Indians, Wilton Band, I was raised around that side of my people, but in the urban setting in Sacramento. And so I've resided in Sacramento most of my life, and that's where a lot of our people have been relocated as a result of some of the things that have happened to our people historically. And so I want to say thank you to the relatives that invited me out to present here today and to talk about 500 years of history in 1 hour. Is to share some historical and intergenerational impacts, culture and healing, and then this integration of culture and healing to the Western approaches, especially as we're defending ourselves against this opioid crisis that is killing our people in ways that we haven't seen in a long time. And so, we survived the alcohol crisis, I guess we could say that, and then the methamphetamine epidemic, and now we have this opioid crisis. In my community, just within the past year, we've actually had 5 overdose deaths. And so we need to do something different. We need to open our mind, we need to open our hearts, and we need to explore new ways of healing, new ways of wellness, new ways of moving forward as a people. And so I follow our traditional ways, the Miwok ways. We're roundhouse people. Our people believe in this realm of spirituality, that it's an energy that exists. It's not just this idea of feeling good. Oh, look at Albert. He's floating across the ground. He must be an Indian. Right? Sometimes those stereotypes that exist, but it's an energy that exists. It's this power that we can't see, but we know it's there. So I'm going to share a little bit about that. Dr. Moeller, really appreciate your presentation, because I wholeheartedly believe in science and the Western approaches to healing and wellness, as much as I believe in our culture and our traditions that have sustained us eternally for our people. And I had this discussion not long ago with some of my relatives that they still live in this level of trauma that exists in our mind, that we can't trust the Western approaches because of what they've done to us. So, but my belief is that now we have to be able to trust one another, because these things that are presented to us today, they're not only ours, they belong to all of us. And so we have to bring these gifts to the table to share this knowledge. And so reaching out to the dominant culture, but also to my tribal relatives, to let's sit at this table again together to try to make sense of this thing called addiction and try to heal from it. So I believe that, man, everything we do in life, it's really, this brain is so powerful. Without the brain, the rest of us, I don't get to wave my hand. The words don't come out of my mouth in the way that I want them to most of the time, right? And so today, this morning, I was sitting at the end of my bed after a long night's travel, and I'm going, I need some dopamine. But I used to say, because I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict myself, I need some dope, right? That was my focus. The word dope meant something different when I was caught in that spiral of addiction. And so that presentation this morning about dopamine was really powerful, because right now I think my dopamine levels are probably around 80. I'm really excited and stoked. But my behavior may not match that affect, right? Here I look like, because I'm really mellow. So when you see me super mellow, I'm like, Albert's so cool. Like, no, my dopamine levels are probably really low right now. So I really appreciate that presentation. So I have a slide, and part of this slide that I put together was borrowed from White Bison, and I work for White Bison organization, and White Bison is an organization that develops curriculum-based interventions for Native Americans who are healing from many things, primarily addiction issues. And so the presentation, the first part of the slide, is going to look at historical trauma, but in order for us to look at historical trauma and understand it, we have to look at how things were before. What did we lose? What were some of those things that we're healing from, that we're trying to get back using culture? And so the presentation will look at how our history impacts us today, historical trauma, resilience, and healing, how we can relate this information in the work that we're doing in our communities, and then at the end, if I don't talk too much like I'm doing right now, we'll have time for questions. So next slide, please. Some of the objectives at the end of our cultural competency presentation. You should be able to explain how cultural beliefs influence an individual's approach to health, wellness, and treatment, recognize personal and professional tendencies for bias and stereotyping, discuss some of the importance of integrated culture in our practices, specifically for substance use disorder and opioid use disorder, and historical intergenerational trauma and the impacts on tribal communities. Next slide, please. How our history impacts us today. Next slide. So, what we believe and what we teach in our program back home is that the Creator created this system of living that incorporates all things. Some people call it ecosystem. That there's a system that is created that is connected both spiritually and physically. And that this is the source of all native culture. That the seen world is connected to this unseen world. And this is the connection to our native culture. That no matter where we are in the world, that there's this connection spiritually that exists. And I've been blessed to travel around to many tribes across the United States, into Canada, my own tribe across California. And every tribe, there's universal principles around spirituality. And that it's more than just that feeling. It's something that it's even difficult to explain unless you experience it. We all experience that level somewhere in our life. Many of us seek it out. For us Native people, we have ceremonies. We have places that we go to, sacred places, to find that. We connect it no matter where we are. We find it within each other in our relationships to human beings. It's an energy that exists. Feeling lives there, right? We say spirituality centers in the brain, but it emits from all over. It starts from the inside and carries its way out. I had an elder tell me one time, he says, Albert, you know, there's no space in between us. You've been taught that there's space in between us, but there's not. There's an energy that exists that connects us all together. He says the light lives there. Your feelings live there. He said that, man, when you see someone crying in your family, doesn't it make you want to cry? That's spirituality. That's that energy. Spirituality can be positive and negative. It can be good and bad. And so there's this idea that this connection to spirit for the indigenous people is so powerful that it exists there. I'm raising my stick because I have to communicate with them. So if you see me doing this weird stuff, it's because I'm communicating with the relatives up there. That no matter where we are in the world, all four directions, north, east, south, and west in the world, that we bring gifts to this world. That no matter where we are, four races of every human being, red, black, yellow, white, that we have gifts. That many of the elders believe that we are human first, that we saw each other as human first, that we came together. So what we believe now is that we are in this great time of healing, and that it'll feel like, man, the world is the worst place it's ever been. But through that, there'll be this great time of healing that will occur. And that all humans will come together and we'll share those gifts again. Those gifts of healing. We'll respect each other. And that's what I heard Dr. Moeller saying earlier, that I really appreciated that when he said that I'm here to share my gift. I'm here to share my knowledge. I'm not here to tell you what to do. In the places I've traveled in Indian communities, that's been a problem. And historically, that has been a problem, that the white man, right? The burden has been, they're going to come in and fix us. They're going to tell us what's good for us without listening to what we're saying about what we need. And so I really appreciate when he said that, because that's called respect, it's called honor, it's called dignity and integrity. That no matter where we are in the world, that we will bring those things together. This is an image of the healing forest. And this concept that we have to create this healing force in our communities again. But that if we go back 500 years, we can look at our communities and how they existed then, across tribal communities, without being pan-Indian, right? I've heard that term. Without blending cultures. But we see that in our communities. There's so much that have happened in our tribal communities historically that we've shared cultural knowledge and traditions. The sweat lodge ceremony on my side of the mountain isn't a tradition that we practice in the way that we practice it today. There's some relatives that brought it over from other tribes. But guess what? We use the sweat lodge ceremony to help us heal now. And we've adapted it for use with me, with people. And so in our traditional families that we're creating this healing forest, we're going back to look at how it was before. So in our communities, our young people, they went to the adults for guidance. The young boys, they went to the young men, to the adult men. And the young boys, the children, they learned what it meant to be a warrior. They learned how to hunt. They learned how to fish. They learned how to sing, dance, pray. They learned how to cry. They learned how to share their thoughts and their feelings from other men. Those things were normal in our tribal communities. We had those things in place. They went to the medicine people to learn their relationships with the water, with the plants, with the fire, with the sun, with each other. The young men were taught how to treat women respectfully, with honor, to teach them about those things that the women provide. So it's balance that was taught. And again, the young women, they went to the women for that guidance. The young women went to the women to be taught what it meant to be a tribal woman, and what it meant to be pious as a woman, from a woman's perspective. That's what the young women, they went, and we had ceremonies for that. Coming of age ceremonies, right? Rites of passage ceremonies. They went and they learned what it meant to be a tribal woman from our people. We had those systems in place. And the adults, again, the young men went to the adult men to learn what it meant to be a tribal man in their communities. And the adults, they went to the elders. So we had these systems in place that the adults go to the elders for that knowledge. And we respect our elders. Those elders, they have wisdom, lived experience. Like they understand, even in our communities today. I know one brother that has been working in this community for a long time. And I've been coming to this community, I think, since 2006 to assist in any way I can. You know, me and another brother, Mike Duncan, we'd travel over here and we'd work with some of the relatives here. And we'd sit in a circle together, man, and they would take good care of us. Pat Nelson, he's that man. And I consider Pat, an elder in the community because he carries that humor, but he's really passionate about the work he's doing. And he's been here every year. We come over and there he is. He's an elder to me. And so I value him. In our old ways, we had that. That was normal. That's just the way it was. And those traditional elders had knowledge of medicine, the plant people, the water relative, the animal. They had knowledge of that relationship. Spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally, we understood the relationships. And those elders knew they had a responsibility. They knew they had a responsibility to teach the vision, the principles, the laws, and the value, which is natural order. They understood their relationship, what they were supposed to be teaching. And if you look at at the root of these communities, you look at the root of what's going on in our communities, what we're trying to get back to, planting these in our soil of our communities. This forest is really a representation of our communities, our families, family systems, is healing, is spirituality, is connectedness. We're all interconnected in this larger system. The language, the cultural values, the elders' teachings, all that wisdom and knowledge. We had those things. And then something happened to us. Something happened to us as indigenous people across this land. And we haven't talked about it enough. It's kind of a hard subject for many of us to talk about. Even in our own community, it's hard because it brings up that word trauma. We start to take a look at trauma. And I appreciate that Dr. Muller touched on that in the beginning. These layers of trauma that exist, right? Something happened to us. And we call it historical trauma, intergenerational trauma. And we all live with our own stuff, our own levels of trauma. So now we have compound and complex trauma. And we have to be able to peel away. But it's hard to peel away trauma when you don't know what it is, when you don't understand it. And what we believe in the Native communities is that we have to look at the historical trauma, the intergenerational, how it's been taught generation after generation, and how it affects us today in order to heal from it. We have to understand that. And we ask those relatives that are coming in that are not Native to understand that with us. Meet us where we are and understand that this stuff did exist and it is still affecting us today. Maybe I wasn't sent to a boarding school, but my father was. And the things that happened to him in those places really destroyed him. And he carried those behaviors and he handed them over to us. He said, here's my trauma. Knowingly or unknowing, I honestly believe I've had to forgive my dad for a lot of things that he didn't truly understand what he was doing. Now, it didn't absolve him of that responsibility, but I can forgive now that I understand historical trauma. So we went from that to this, historical trauma, and it cycled. It happened over generations. Limited access to treatment, single-parent families, low-income, few jobs, lack of support and education. So we understand disparities in healthcare, especially in our more rural reservation communities, where the disparities in healthcare can be enormous at some level, maybe absent in many cases of effective healthcare. I know with the opioid crisis and medication-assisted treatment, I'm coming to find out there are a lot of communities that just don't have access to this. And what we saw is those kids came home. All those kids came home. They grew up, and they grew up to become adults. That's when we started to see the first instances of alcoholism in our communities. We started to see alcoholism become even more rampant than it already was. We started to see these kids growing up, and the sexual abuse started to show up. And what we know happens when, and there's research and studies that show about sex offenders, that most sex offenders, many sex offenders have been victims of sexual abuse. And so what we see in our communities today is we see that lateral violence happening. We see those things happening. We see lateral violence. It's happening, and it's happening to our kids. You see sexual abuse. And this is the era of boarding school, residential schools in Canada. But here in California, we kind of got the double whammy. Before Europeans came over and the boarding schools happened, we had the mission era as well. We had Spanish conquest along the coast of California that decimated a lot of those tribes. And they brought the missions, Catholicism. And there's a lot of things that happened there as well, similar to the boarding school era. So we kind of got that double whammy of conquest and being conquered in that way. It's really ugly. And there's a lot more that we could go into, but just for the sake of time, we won't go into that too much. Because what we know about historical trauma is the combination of immense losses and traumatic events that are perpetrated on an entire culture. And what that meant for Native people is we lost a lot of things. We lost culture, language, land, our people due to death, disease, and war, a way of life, and this is a big one, religion, and this last one, this idea of family structure. Family structure is very important. It's one of the key components to the principal laws and values of existence. Those things we talked about value, we talked about value early on. Those things of value, and it doesn't matter. I've been to several tribes. I'm going to Arizona next week to work with some of the Titman. And at the core of who we are as indigenous people, if you look at it, it was family. You look at that original healing forest model, that's family, right? The kids go to the parents, that's family. Parents go to the elders, that's family, that's system. No matter where you are, right here, Bishop Bayou, I know that value exists. I've been here long enough to know that at the core is what we're fighting for is to bring healing back to our families. In social work, we talk about marriage and family therapists. We talk about those family systems, dysfunctional family systems. And we look at alcoholic family systems, addiction family systems. We know that we had these things in place at one time. And so how do we know about intergenerational and historical trauma? There's definitely been a lot of research prior to Native Americans, the Jewish Holocaust, the survivors of that. There's been research and study on that. Japanese Americans who were placed in internment camps. Of course, African American slavery. We know that there's a history with that, and that's been researched and defined, and we understand that how that affects our communities today. Central American refugees, especially in this country, we've known more, but more recently the studies on Native Americans. And how does trauma get passed down through generations? Well, what we do is we adapt as human beings, and we develop mechanisms, right, to cope in our situations. Many of us, and if we're talking about addiction issues, they're maladaptive. They're destructive. We develop these coping mechanisms. Dopamine levels in the brain, right? How do we do that? This is what we do. We develop these defense mechanisms. For Native people, enduring immense losses, grief, unresolved grief, and past traumatic stress became a way of living. People believing that feeling numb, being angry, acting self-destructively, and feeling hopeless is a normal way to be. It's like it's normal. And I work in my community back home, and I work in a facility, a 52-week batter's program, and we call it Honoring the Sacred, which is about honoring us, men, women, children, elders, like honoring the sacredness of their life and their existence, in a true sense, in a spiritual sense. But what I hear in our own tribal communities is like, Albert, this is normal. Like, that's just the way it is. That's just how my dad is. It's normal. So we've accepted that trauma is normal. We've accepted, oh, you just don't know my family. This is who we are. We'll kick your, excuse my language, we'll kick your ass. You don't mess with our people. We'll F you up. I'll drink you under the table. I'm gonna end it. That fire and water don't affect me. Like, we've come to believe that feeling down, desperate is normal. Hungry is normal. And it's not. It's not our way. Our way isn't to abuse each other. Men aren't supposed to put their hands on women. We shouldn't be killing ourselves with alcohol. Our children are killing themselves at a higher rate than any other population on this planet right now. Why is that? Because this trauma is being handed down. Sexual abuse, lateral violence, the impacts of poverty. Like, money doesn't fix everything. Like, I got some relatives that say, oh, we got a casino out, all our problems are over. We're rich now. But guess what? Their problems are expounded because they have money. Because they're not putting those resources where they're going to make a difference, where they're going to change. And I really appreciate that we got an opportunity to have this this summit here, because that's money put in a good place, right? The resources. Go next slide, please. Other unfortunate consequences include not believing you have a future, difficulties in relationships, distrust of the outside world, and these consequences are often passed down through direct parent-child interactions with extended family in the community. And we see that. My family is a great example with my father. And I'm not the only one. So I travel around different places within my own tribal community. A lot of our elders won't talk about this stuff. But it's happening. They're sharing it, they're teaching it without realizing they're teaching historical trauma. They're passing these things down. They won't talk about it. It's too painful. They'll drink. They'll cuss each other out. They'll share that pain. And then when we sit down and talk about it, I have an elder that comes to our Red Road group. We do a Red Road meeting. She's been coming for a long time. She's got 30 years of sobriety. She's in her late 70s, close to 80. She comes religiously. She's like our elder in our Red Road meeting. But when she started coming many years ago, and I started talking about like 2005, started talking to our community about historical trauma, she pulled me inside and she said, Albert, if you're going to talk about this, can you please let me know first, because I won't come to that class. And I sat down and we had this talk, and she started crying. Because before that, I didn't know. She never talked about it. It's too hard. She's in recovery. She follows the culture. She does 12-step. She never addressed that part. It's too hard. It's too embarrassing. So then we talked about it, and I helped my elder get through some of those things. So now she's able to share her story with the rest of the community. She's celebrating that part of her life because she's resilient. She's like, no, we have to talk about it. She promotes the healing from historical trauma because it's been so ingrained, this unresolved grief is killing our people. And we do these unhealthy behaviors to try to heal from the outside in. When in fact, the healing has to come from the inside out, spirituality. It seems really simple, but man, it's a lot of work. Next slide, please. Often 2-3 generations pass before the most challenging symptoms of trauma show up in individuals, families, and communities. We've seen that. It begins to sow the seeds of genocide, as has been documented around the world. A dismissed people is easier to eliminate. A dismissed people is easier to eliminate. So when you marginalize folks and we start to believe, yeah, our voice don't matter, we don't have enough people, we're no good and lazy anyway, we're worthless, why try? I mean, there are places in Indian communities where that's the reality, that's the norm. And it sucks that I have to admit that, but man, it's also beautiful that I get to go there now and help. That's the beauty of it. Next slide, please. Opioid crisis in Native communities. Whoa, I can't see that. From 2010 to 2016, the rate of OUD diagnosis increased nearly 500%. Every day, an average of 115 Americans die from an opioid overdose. In 2016, 66% of overdose deaths involved opioids. Illicit manufacturing of fentanyl has complicated and exacerbated the growing epidemic. And we see that in our communities. Opioid overdose-related deaths, visits increased by 30%. And in American Indian and Alaskan populations, the second highest overdose rates from all opioids in 2017. 15.7 deaths per 100,000 in the population, representing 3 times the rate for other ethnic groups. And American Indian and Alaskan populations also had the second highest overdose death rates from heroin and 3rd highest from synthetic opioids. My understanding, and that's from the CDC, is that it's actually number 1. So I know, and it depends, if we're looking at it from a national But if we're looking at it from tribal community to tribal community, if any of you have ever been to reservations, it's like driving to the reservation here. It's so far set from like these huge city centers, right? That the number can be higher here than it is on my reservation. It may be 3 times higher here, but on this reservation, it could be 10. Like, that's the reality. So the numbers stay out as a whole, but per reservation, per tribal community, that number can be higher. Suicide rates are like that. The number can be higher. Next slide, please. So I work at the Native American Health Center in Sacramento. That's my main gig. I also work at Televal Indian Health, which is a telemedicine program that we're developing for medication-assisted treatment in tribal communities. And I'm a national trainer for white bison. But this is my day job. And I wanted to share some of this, and I was asked just to share a little bit about cultural competency in the workplace, but this idea of cultural humility, lifelong process of learning, self-examination, and refinement of one's own awareness, knowledge, behavior, and attitudes on an interplay of power, influence, and context. Next slide, please. Cultural humility requires a respect for difference. In practice, cultural humility means bridging perspectives between ourselves and the people with we work with. Now, I've had to do that as a man working with with just general population. And I heard Dr. Mueller, he said the same thing when he presented this morning. And when he said what he said about, I'm here to help you, not tell you what you need, I'm here to work with you. That we're always having to examine our own perspectives on culture, race, ethnicity. We have to look at ourselves. I have to face that humility and look at my implicit biases around other cultures, race. And I remember 20 years ago when I was working on my sobriety, actually almost 25 now, I went into an AA meeting. I was told to go there. And I went, and there was an elder sitting in the corner. Room full of others, non-natives, and then this one man. I knew he was Indian because he had his Indian hat on, he had long hair, and he looked like me. So I beelined to him. And I went straight to him and I said, hey, what's up, Indian? And he looked at me and he looked at my hand and he looked at me and he was real serious too. And he said, it's not the white man's fault. And I said, what? He said, stop blaming the white man for all your problems. I said, I'm just here for a meeting. I just thought you look like you're Indian. It's not the white man's fault. And I just went and sat down and I was like, dang, he's angry. He needs some dopamine. But what he meant was stop blaming everybody for your problems. Later on, I came to find out that he did that for a reason. He did that to every Native person that came into the program. He wanted us to take ownership and be accountable for our own thoughts and feelings. He wanted us to be accountable for how we treated ourselves and our people. He didn't want us to be victims anymore. He understood the trauma. He's a product of boarding school himself. Survivor, resilient. But what it taught me also is to face humility and look at my own implicit biases on how I work with people. My own people, man, we're good at it. I know how to look at my own people, and we were taught that really well at a young age. Don't talk to your cousins over there; they're no good. Stay away from them. We do that to each other. In my tribe, where I'm from, and then we definitely don't talk to them. Don't trust the black people. Especially can't trust the white man. I mean, those are things we have been raised with. And doing this work as a counselor at the Native American Health Center, I had to learn to look at my own implicit biases on how I relate to people. And we're asking you to do the same thing in working with our tribal community, to understand this thing we're dealing with in terms of intergenerational trauma and historical community. That's a picture of me, and I get to use the culture in my practice. And I'm violating someone's confidentiality by showing the back of their head. That's actually my daughter. We posed for this picture as we were promoting, but that I actually do get to use the culture. You know, smudging, there's a group from Berkeley, some native students, who did some research on smudging, and there's evidence that smudging increases dopamine levels in the brain. It's a form of centering, getting grounded, spirituality. Sounds like DBT, right? It connects us to those things we can't see. It makes us feel good. Something as simple as burning mist, saying a prayer, singing a song. Man, it does. It's better than most drugs. Next slide, please. Using trauma-informed approaches, understanding the patient's perspective. Ethnography is so important. The goal, making everyone feel accepted and welcome. Next slide, please. Opioid addiction prevention, treatment, and recovery strategies. Better diagnosing of addiction, access to treatment, recovery services, inpatient. Strategies address the root causes of trauma, chronic stress, mental health counseling, cultural resources, traditional healing. Integrating native cultural. And each tribe doesn't practice the exact same ceremonies. We don't all speak the same language. We don't all eat the same food. So wherever you are in that community, you should connect with a Pat Nelson. You should connect if you're working in a clinic and as physicians, clinicians, at whatever capacity. Connect with those tribal spiritual leaders, ceremony leaders. If you want to know more, connect with the historians. Find out that history in order to understand what the needs are. To build trust. Next slide, please. This is my son and my granddaughter. They gave me permission to use this for this presentation. That in the back, we call that Hungi, which kind of means roundhouse. It's our spiritual place where we go. Our healers used to doctor people. Culture is prevention. Our traditions help us heal. Decolonizing our mind and thriving, reclaiming who we are, identity. And we are still here. And that's the conversation that I had a long time ago. And really recently with relatives who were saying, how do you know drumming works? How does that work? How is that going to help me? Well, the proof is that we're still here. A lot of those elders that kept these things underground, the language, we weren't supposed to be speaking our language. We weren't supposed to be having sweat lodge or making our kakata. Like, that was the plan, to eliminate all of that from us. I mean, I'm speaking to you in the Conqueror's language. I don't even know my language. And so it's important for us to get back to our identity. That is going to help us here. I'm witnessing it across the land. Bringing our culture back. Integrating it with some of the Western approaches. And that's where medication-assisted treatment comes in. I'm witnessing healing. It's saving our people's lives. Medication-assisted treatment. Now, I'm one of those who is an abstinence-only guy. No, don't trust the government. Don't trust their pills or their medication. They just want to keep us sick. But what I'm seeing with opioid use disorder is our people are dying at an alarming rate. And a lot of them are young people. They're smoking heroin. They're using pills. They're mixing it with alcohol. And then they're coming saying, fix me. And we get them into detox. And they're like, that's too much of it. I can't stay. And they go back and they relapse. We actually had one that went to detox. Couldn't take it. Anxiety, physical pain, left. Went and did some heroin and died. Man, that hurts. As a man in recovery, as a native man in this community. Next slide, please. Cultural considerations. We know from the histories of culture, invite conversation. What does your culture mean to you? Ask our people, what does it mean to your health? How do you interact with cultural activities? That should be in your screening tools. I've developed screening tools for my people that screen and assess for their level of cultural idea, cultural knowledge, cultural practice. Because I want to use that if they don't have it, and if they do, I want to build on that. Ceremony and mat may not mix. You have to understand that some of the ceremonies don't mix. But you have to understand that. That's why working with the professionals and the cultural people is so important when helping our people who are experiencing opioid use disorder. Because sending someone to detox in a sweat lodge, It's probably not a good idea. I don't think it is. Next slide, please. And this is what we want to get back to. This is what we're trying to get back to. This is it. We talked about it in the beginning, full circle. This is what we're hoping to get back to in the society we live in today. We want to get back to understanding we live in this world. We got a lot of work to do, I understand. But that's the vision. That's the vision in the world we live in today, that we can get back to the healing force. And each and every one of you, I want to thank you for coming here and listening to my presentation. But more importantly, in the work that you do in the community. You're all healers in some capacity. Every last one of you has a gift that we have brought here to this room today to share. An energy, a willingness to learn. Whether you're law enforcement, in the healthcare facility, grassroots level, case managing, front desk, you bring something to the table to help our people heal. And so I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and share my gift with you today. I hope.